I saw her leave the house that night, wearing a dress I had never seen before. Fair, bright, provocative. The kind of clothes that she said didn't suit her, but that were apparently perfect for that occasion. Her hands were flustered as she adjusted her earrings in the hallway mirror. I was sitting in the armchair, holding a glass of whiskey, watching every movement as if I could predict what would come next. She turned to me, smiled slightly and said she would be back late. There was something in her voice, an unsure but firm tone. A tone I had never heard before. I just nodded, without saying anything, and watched her walk out the door, leaving behind her the sweet perfume that used to drive me crazy. But that night, that perfume just made me nauseous. I picked up my cell phone and opened the messages that I had already read several times during the afternoon. The words still burned on the screen like an open wound. I can't wait to see you tonight. Finally alone. My heart hammered in my chest as I read and reread that sentence. I needed to confirm it with my own eyes, even though part of me still hoped I was wrong. I followed her car through the city, keeping enough distance so as not to be noticed. She seemed nervous behind the wheel, as if she felt she was being watched, but she continued driving to the parking lot of the event hall where the company party was taking place. I stopped at the corner, watching from afar as she got out of the car and walked quickly. Then, he appeared. Tall, confident, smiling in a way that made me want to get out of the car and end it all right there. But I held back. I needed more than anger. I needed proof. In the hall, music echoed and lights danced across the ceiling. They were there, together, dancing as if they were the only couple in the room. His hand on her waist. The lips too close to her ear. And then, the laughter. The same laugh I heard for years, the same one that made me forget any problem, now echoed like a cutting blade. Every detail of that scene was recorded in me. My plan was already underway. I had sent messages to close friends, colleagues, and even her boss, inviting them over for a little surprise that night. A surprise that, without them knowing, would change everything. As the waiter passed by with glasses of champagne, I grabbed one, took a quick sip, and walked to the center of the room, where a microphone was being prepared for the company awards announcement. The presenter's voice sounded distant as I waited my turn. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I knew I couldn't fail. When my time finally came, I walked up to the stage and felt all eyes on me. Including hers. She froze for a second, as if she knew what was coming, but tried to cover it up with a nervous smile. Her lover remained at her side, confident, without imagining what was about to happen. I took a deep breath, held the microphone and began to speak. I thanked everyone for coming, praised the employees' efforts and then turned directly to her. He said how proud he was to share his life with such a dedicated and, above all, loyal woman. The hall fell silent. I saw her smile fade. I saw her eyes move toward her lover, seeking support. But there was no more support. There was only fear. Then I took the envelope with the divorce papers out of my pocket. A moment that I planned down to the smallest detail. I raised the envelope high, announcing to everyone the real reason for that night. I said that, while everyone was there celebrating professional achievements, I was dealing with betrayal from those who should have been by my side. Murmurs began, shocked expressions filled the room. She tried to get closer, tried to take the microphone from my hands, but I backed away. There would be no more words from her. There were no more excuses. He, the lover, started walking backwards, as if he could disappear into the crowd, but I had already assured him that it wouldn't be that easy. My next move was to reveal something none of them expected. Something that would make that night not soon forgotten. And as she held the envelope open, I could see the despair growing in her eyes. Because at that moment, she knew there was no going back. And the worst was yet to come. Welcome to the channel where secrets are revealed and truths come to light. Here, we do not tolerate any type of betrayal. Our stories are fictional, but the pain, consequences and lessons are real. Betrayal destroys homes, breaks trust and leaves scars that time cannot erase. Get ready for an engaging narrative, full of emotion, twists and justice. Now, take a deep breath. You're about to hear a story shocking that will hold your attention from beginning to end. Let's get started. Lucas always believed that happiness was built in details. When he met Amanda, he felt like he had finally found someone who shared this vision. They met during college, in one of those chance encounters that only later realize how predestined they were. Amanda was sitting in the library, surrounded by books of classic literature and scattered notes, while Lucas looked for a place to focus on his research. A polite request to share the table turned into hours of conversation, first about authors and stories, then about dreams, family and the future. It didn't take long for him to realize there was something different about Amanda. She had a lightness in her eyes and an easy laugh, but she also carried a depth that disarmed him. Lucas was not a man who gave in easily, but Amanda made him let his guard down. Before long, they were inseparable. He fell in love with the way she gestured when she spoke, the way she frowned when she concentrated, and the way she found beauty in the simplest things. Amanda said Lucas brought stability to her life, something she never had before. She came from a family marked by emotional ups and downs, separated parents and fights that echoed through the halls of her childhood. Lucas, on the other hand, had grown up in a stable home, with parents who were examples of partnership and companionship. Maybe that was what attracted her to him, the promise of security and constancy that she had always lacked. Over time, they built a life together. They got married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family, and went on their honeymoon in a paradisiacal place. Lucas always remembered that trip as the moment he was sure he had made the right choice. Amanda was radiant, and he felt invincible next to her. They shared laughter, adventures and plans for the future, as if the whole world was at their fingertips. When they returned, they began to organize the house where they would spend the next few years. Amanda took care of every detail with dedication, from choosing the furniture to arranging the pictures on the wall. For Lucas, it was comforting to see her so involved in building the home. In the first few years, everything seemed perfect. Amanda landed a good job at a reputable company and quickly rose to prominence. Lucas, in turn, opened his own graphic design company, a dream he had cultivated since his college days. They supported each other through difficult times, celebrated achievements together and made plans for the future. When Amanda received a promotion, Lucas organized a special dinner to celebrate. He was always like that, attentive to details, always willing to make her feel special. Amanda often said she felt lucky to have him by her side, and Lucas believed that. But, over time, things started to change. Small cracks appeared in the fabric of the marriage. There were no explosive fights or obvious betrayals, but rather a distance that began to grow between them. Amanda started working longer hours and bringing her worries home. Lucas tried to support her, but he felt that, little by little, he was being pushed out of that world they used to share. She became increasingly reserved, less willing to share the thoughts and fears she once confided in him. Lucas began to notice more frequent absences. Amanda claimed meetings and work trips, and he believed her. After all, he always trusted her. But some nights, even when they were together, Lucas felt like something was wrong. Amanda was there physically, but her mind seemed distant. He tried to talk, looked for ways to reconnect, but he felt like she was avoiding deeper topics. She would smile and say that everything was fine, that she just needed time to adjust to her new responsibilities. Lucas wanted to believe, but an uneasiness began to grow inside him. Even so, he continued to strive. I planned trips to rekindle the passion, prepared surprises and tried to create special moments, but Amanda's responses were lukewarm. She seemed grateful but not excited. Lucas began to wonder if he was failing at something, if he had stopped being the man Amanda had fallen in love with. This doubt gnawed at him, but he never verbalized it. He preferred to believe that it was just a phase, something that would pass with time. While Amanda got deeper and deeper into work, Lucas stuck to the small routines of marriage. He kept leaving sweet notes on the breakfast table, sending messages throughout the day and hoping she noticed the effort. But no matter how hard he tried, he felt something slipping through his fingers. It was like holding sand, and the tighter I squeezed, the faster I seemed to lose it. When Amanda suggested that they needed to go out more, socialize with her coworkers, Lucas saw it as an opportunity to get closer again. He accepted the invitations, made an effort to fit in and participated in the conversations. But inside, he felt like he was forcing himself into a world that wasn't his own. Still, I wanted to please her. Until the night of the company party, Lucas tried to ignore the signs. I tried to stifle doubts with rationalizations and convenient explanations. But there was something that night, in the way Amanda dressed herself, in the nervousness disguised in hurried smiles, that made him realize that maybe he was wrong. Maybe he no longer knew that woman who slept next to him. As she walked across the room, greeting colleagues and receiving compliments on her dress, Lucas watched her. I felt the weight of years shared, promises exchanged and dreams built. He also felt the emptiness that grew faster and faster, like a hole that he couldn't fill. And at that moment, something inside him broke. He realized that it was no longer enough to try. It was no longer enough to wait. And, as the music grew louder and voices echoed throughout the room, Lucas decided that this would be the night that everything would change. Lucas stared at his reflection in the mirror as he straightened his tie. The knot was too tight, but he didn't care. The tension he felt in his chest seemed reflected in that pressure against his neck. He took a deep breath, straightened his shirt cuffs and took one last look at the empty room before grabbing his car keys. Amanda had already left. She said she needed to arrive early to help organize the event, but the excuse seemed too vague. Lucas tried not to care. He tried to convince himself that it was just tiredness and routine taking its toll on both of them. But there was something about that night that made him uneasy, as if a shadow hung over every thought. On the way, the city blurred past the window as he tried to shake off the sensations that insisted on tormenting him. He forced himself to think about the words he would say, the people he would meet, but the image of Amanda smiling as she left the house never left his mind. It was a different smile, as if it carried a secret that Lucas was not invited to know. Upon arriving at the party location, the loud sound of conversations and laughter filled the room. Lucas walked between the groups of people, greeting familiar faces but not really paying attention. He was looking for Amanda, and when he finally saw her, he felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. She was laughing, holding a glass of champagne and leaning closer to a man Lucas recognized by sight. Someone he knew was from the same sector as her, but whose name didn't come to mind. The closeness between the two immediately bothered him, but he ignored the urge to intervene. He walked to the bar and ordered a drink, keeping his eyes on them as he tried to convince himself that it was just friendship, just a coworker being too kind. But the details continued to accumulate. The way he touched Amanda's arm when he spoke, the way she smiled in a way Lucas hadn't seen in months. It was like watching a movie in slow motion, and every gesture seemed amplified. Lucas began to feel his blood boil, but he maintained his posture. When Amanda finally saw him, her eyes widened for a second before returning to her usual smile. She crossed the room to greet him, leaving the man behind. Lucas tried to decipher whether it was guilt or relief in her look, but she was quick to hug him and whisper in his ear that she was happy he came. He smiled back, but inside he felt something was wrong. The night continued at a slow pace. Lucas watched Amanda move among the guests, always surrounded, always smiling. She seemed too comfortable, as if this social life was her real home and he was just a visitor. He tried to join the conversation at times, but he felt like he didn't belong there. At some point, he saw Amanda and her colleague disappear through the side door. He waited a few minutes before following them. The hallway was empty, but the closed doors suggested there were private rooms along the way. Lucas felt his heart accelerate. Each step echoed like a warning, but he continued. When he finally found the door slightly ajar, he stopped. The muffled sound of laughter and murmurs came through the crack. Lucas pushed the door slowly and what he saw made him freeze. Amanda was leaning against the wall, with her hands on her colleague's shoulders, and he was too close. They whispered something that Lucas couldn't understand, but the gesture said it all. His hand sliding around her waist, his face close to her neck as Amanda tilted her head, leaving the space free. Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He could have entered the room at that moment, he could have confronted them both, but something stopped him. He stepped back, closed the door, and walked back down the hallway as if in a trance. The noise of the party reached him again, but it seemed distant. He stopped at the bar, ordered another drink and tried to control the tremor in his hands. He thought about leaving it behind, but he knew he couldn't. I needed to see how far this would go. Hours passed and Amanda returned to the salon as if nothing had happened. She danced, laughed and talked, but Lucas could only see the images that were recorded in his mind. When she finally returned to his side, she tried to act like nothing was wrong, but Lucas felt the weight of every word. She talked about how wonderful the night was, how happy she was that they were there together, but all he could think about was what he had seen. Amanda continued to smile, but Lucas knew that smile was no longer for him. He knew something had broken between them, something that might never be fixed. Still, he remained calm. He talked, smiled and pretended everything was fine. But inside, something was growing. Something he couldn't control. He watched Amanda walk away once again, going to meet the man she was with before. This time, Lucas didn't look away. He watched every move, every subtle touch, every shared laugh. And then, something changed. Lucas felt his anger turn into determination. He knew that night wouldn't end like the others. I knew something needed to be done. While Amanda danced with her lover, Lucas was already planning his next steps. He knew that that party would be remembered by everyone, but not for the reasons that Amanda imagined. And as the lights in the room continued to flicker and music filled the room, Lucas took a deep breath and prepared himself. Because that night was still far from over. Lucas felt the blood pulsing in his temples as he walked to the improvised stage in the center of the room. The microphone in his hand felt heavier than it should, but he didn't waver. Amanda's eyes met his the instant he walked up the steps, and for a moment, he saw panic spread across her face. It was too late to retreat. The buzz in the room began to die down, and Lucas took a breath, feeling the metallic taste of adrenaline in his mouth. He began by thanking everyone for coming, pretending to be calm that he didn't feel. As he spoke, his gaze remained fixed on Amanda, who was trying to smile, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her discomfort. He maintained his cordial tone for a few more seconds before changing the direction of the conversation. He said he wanted to share something personal, something that defined who he was as a man and as a husband. He spoke slowly, letting the words hang heavy in the air. He described how marriage was based on trust, how respect and loyalty formed the pillars of any lasting relationship. Lucas watched as Amanda squeezed the champagne glass so hard that it looked like it was about to burst. He took a deep breath before revealing that he had discovered something that would change his life forever. Silence fell, and Amanda took a step forward, as if to stop what was coming, but Lucas raised his hand, interrupting any of her attempts to intervene. He pulled the envelope from his inside jacket pocket and announced that he had the divorce papers in his hands. The murmur among the guests exploded like muffled thunder. Amanda opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her lover, standing in the background, took a step back, as if he already knew he was about to be swept into the eye of the storm. Lucas continued. He said that, over the past few months, he had worked hard to save his marriage, to rekindle the flame that he felt was fading. He recalled gestures, moments and failed attempts, all in front of an audience that absorbed every word. Then, with a firm voice, he revealed that Amanda had betrayed his trust. The shock was visible. Some guests looked down, others covered their mouths in surprise, but Lucas kept his focus on Amanda. He asked her directly if she had anything to say, something that could justify her actions, but Amanda just shook her head, fighting back the tears. That was when the lover tried to intervene, saying that everything was just a misunderstanding. Lucas laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, full of anger and irony. He said misunderstandings didn't leave marks like these. He revealed that he had hired a private investigator and had enough evidence to ensure that none of this would be questioned. Lucas looked at Amanda one last time and asked why she had done that. She finally found her voice, but what came out was a suppressed sob. She tried to say that she was confused, that she felt alone and that this should never have happened. Lucas interrupted her, saying that her choices were made long before that night. But before he could continue, the lover finally lost his patience and spoke out. He said they were in love and that Amanda deserved to be happy. The room became even more tense. Lucas, maintaining his poise, asked if that was the plan all along, to destroy his marriage so they could be together. It was at that moment that the real secret came to light. Lucas took another envelope out of his pocket, a dossier with information he had gathered about Amanda's lover. She said the man standing next to her was not who he said he was. He revealed that he was married with children, and that his wife was also at the party. The woman, who until then had been in a corner of the room, came forward, shouting his name and demanding explanations. The shock was instantaneous. Amanda looked at the man as if she were seeing him for the first time, and he desperately tried to calm her. But it was too late. The lover's wife confronted him, revealing that she had been suspicious for weeks and had hired a detective to follow him. The hall was plunged into chaos. Amanda turned to Lucas, desperate, begging him not to destroy her life there, but Lucas just replied that she had already done it herself. The lover tried to explain to both women at the same time, but his words were drowned out by the murmurs and growing hubbub. Amanda fell to her knees, crying, while her lover's wife left furiously, followed by him, who stumbled over his words and gestures. Lucas remained on stage for a few more seconds, letting the weight of the moment settle on everyone present. He said cheating not only destroys marriages but also ruins trust, dreams and dignity. He made it clear that night was not about revenge, but about truth. And that everyone in that room needed to remember that secrets always come to light. When he got off the stage, Amanda tried to hold him, but he moved away. He said that the love he felt for her had died the moment he discovered the betrayal. She kept begging, but Lucas didn't look back. He crossed the room as eyes followed him, but he felt no shame. He felt relief. Because, for the first time in a long time, he was in control. And as Amanda broke down, Lucas knew this was just the first part of his journey to move forward. Lucas crossed the room under the gazes that followed him like blades. He felt cold sweat running down the back of his neck, but he didn't allow his hands to shake. Amanda remained there, kneeling, with her eyes fixed on him, her face stained with tears and smudged makeup. Her lover, now exposed, was trying to leave the room amid screams from his wife, who was pushing him while demanding answers. But Lucas didn't stop to watch that disaster unfold. He wanted to get out of there, he wanted to breathe. He needed to get away from this chaos before he lost the control he had fought so hard to maintain. He walked through the hall doors and felt the cold night air hit his face. He leaned against the wall outside, closed his eyes and let the silence of the corridor envelop him. But the silence was short-lived. Amanda appeared, still breathing raggedly, her hurried footsteps echoing against the floor. She stopped a few feet away from him, hesitantly, as if she feared getting too close and pushing him further away. Lucas opened his eyes and looked at her. She seemed smaller than before, huddled in her own despair. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. He didn't move. She took another step. He said he needed to explain, that it wasn't what it seemed, that there were reasons he didn't understand. Lucas interrupted her, firmly. He asked how she expected him to understand something that was planned behind his back, something that involved lying over and over again. Amanda tried to move forward, grabbed his arm and begged him to listen to her, just this once. Lucas pulled his arm and backed away. He asked her if she really believed that words would be enough to fix what was done. Amanda shook her head, but said there was something he didn't know, something that changed everything. Lucas crossed his arms and waited. She took a deep breath, wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, and confessed that the man he saw her with wasn't just a coworker. He said they had a past. Lucas laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. He asked her if she hoped that would make things better. Amanda insisted, saying she needed to tell the whole truth. She said her lover was someone she knew before she even met Lucas. He said that, years ago, before they got married, the two had a brief relationship. She said she ended everything because she thought she needed something more stable, more secure, and that's what she found in Lucas. But the ex never completely disappeared. She met him again at work and, over time, the feelings returned. Lucas heard everything, feeling each word like a knife piercing his skin. He asked why she didn't push him away. Why didn't you cut contact as soon as you realized what was happening? Amanda said she tried. She said she fought against it, but that she felt suffocated in the routine they had. He said he never wanted to hurt him, but he lost himself in the process. Lucas took a step back, as if he needed to create physical distance to stop her words from reaching him. He asked if everything they lived was a lie. He asked if she was already with him and thinking about someone else. Amanda denied it. He said he loved Lucas, but he didn't know how to balance what he felt. He turned to walk away, but Amanda rushed to catch him again. Said there was more. He turned around, tired, and asked her to speak at once. Amanda took a deep breath and said there was something Lucas didn't know about the man she cheated on him with. She said he was also using her, that she was manipulated. Lucas laughed again, but this time it was a humorless laugh. He asked if that was to make him feel sorry. Amanda shook her head, desperate, and said that her lover had secrets of his own. She said he was using his relationship with her to cover up something bigger. Lucas felt his stomach turn. He asked what she meant by that. Amanda hesitated, but then said that her lover was involved in a scheme within the company, embezzling money, and that their proximity was used as a distraction. She said there was proof, and that he threatened to implicate her if she ended it all. She said she was trapped and didn't know how to get out. Lucas stared at her, trying to process what he had just heard. He asked if she was telling the truth or just inventing a new excuse to save herself. Amanda swore it was true. She said he could check the records, that there was evidence scattered across the company's systems, and that she was afraid of being accused along with him. Lucas took a deep breath and said he didn't know who to believe anymore. Amanda asked him to trust her one last time, to help her get out of that situation. She said she still loved him and would do anything to prove it. Lucas hesitated. The anger he felt still burned inside him, but there was something in her gaze that made him stop and think. Amanda held his hands and begged him not to give up on her. He said he needed it now more than ever. Lucas looked at her hands shaking in his and felt the weight of that decision. He knew that no matter what happened next, that night had already changed everything. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find clarity in the midst of so much chaos. When he opened his eyes again, he saw Amanda waiting for an answer. But he had no answers. Not yet. I just knew that, one way or another, this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something he still couldn't fully understand. And as the voices from the hall echoed in the background, Lucas knew there was still much more to be revealed. Lucas stood in the hallway while Amanda continued speaking, but he no longer heard the words. The sounds mixed in his head like a distant echo, muffled by the weight of what he had just discovered. Her gaze begged for understanding, for forgiveness, but all he could feel was a piercing emptiness that seemed to grow with every second. She tried to explain herself, talked about fear, about regret, about having been deceived, but Lucas couldn't decide whether to believe her or if that was just another desperate excuse. He wanted to get away from her, He wanted to get out of there and leave all that chaos behind, but something held him in place, as if there was still something unresolved, a piece missing to complete the puzzle. Amanda took another step forward, holding his arm tightly and asking him to trust her, saying that if he left her now, she would have no way to protect herself from what would come next. Lucas pulled his arm slowly, without violence, but firm, and looked into her eyes. He asked her if she really thought she could convince him that there was still trust between them after everything. Amanda lowered her head, her shoulders shaking, but Lucas didn't give in. He said he needed answers, not tears. She looked up and promised that she would tell him everything, but begged him to listen to her far away. He said he didn't want any more curious looks or judgments, that he needed a place where he could explain without interruptions. Lucas hesitated, but ended up nodding, maybe because a part of him still needed to understand, or maybe because, despite everything, he couldn't just turn his back and leave. They walked out the back door together, crossing the empty parking lot under the dim streetlights. Lucas kept his distance, walking a few steps ahead, while Amanda tried to catch up to him, but he didn't stop. They got into the car, and the silence between them weighed like an invisible barrier. She watched him drive, but Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Amanda started to speak, but he raised his hand, asking her to wait until they arrived. She obeyed, and the rest of the way was filled only with the sound of the engine. When they arrived home, Lucas went straight to the living room, threw the keys on the table and turned to Amanda. He asked her to start at the beginning, bluntly. Amanda took a deep breath, sat down on the sofa and started counting. She said that it all started as an innocent reunion, that she had no intention of reliving anything from the past, but that the conversations became more frequent and more intimate. She said she was confused, that she missed something, but didn't know exactly what, and that, when she realized it, she was already too involved. Lucas crossed his arms, listening without interrupting, but the hard look in his eyes made it clear that he wasn't convinced. Amanda continued, explaining that her lover started asking for favors, that he used their relationship to gain access to information within the company. He said at first he thought it was something small, but soon realized there was more at stake. She said she tried to walk away, but he threatened to expose the case to Lucas and his co-workers, destroying his reputation and career. He said he gave in to fear, but never stopped thinking about how to get out of that situation. Lucas asked why she never told him anything before, why she chose to betray him rather than ask for help. Amanda lowered her head and said she was ashamed, that she didn't know how to admit that she had let that happen. Lucas took a step back, trying to take it all in. He asked her if she really expected him to believe that that wasn't just a convenient excuse to justify cheating. Amanda looked at him with tears in her eyes and said she understood if he didn't believe her, but she swore she was telling the truth. He asked him to check the records, to look for the evidence. Lucas was silent for a moment, then picked up the phone and made some calls. Amanda watched him nervously as he spoke to a friend who worked at the same company, asking for details about the projects her lover was involved in. After hanging up, Lucas walked to the window and looked out. He said if the evidence was there he would help solve it, but that didn't change what she had done. Amanda ran to him and asked for another chance, saying she would do anything to make things right. Lucas walked away, saying that some things just couldn't be fixed. Amanda cried, saying she loved him and never wanted to hurt him, but Lucas said love didn't justify her choices. Said all he wanted was the truth, and she chose lies. The night dragged on. Lucas couldn't sleep, and Amanda stayed in the next room, crying softly. In the morning, he left early without saying anything. He went to the company and checked the records. It turned out that Amanda was right, that there were inconsistencies in the files and suspicious transfers linked to her lover. He informed his superiors and handed over the evidence. When he returned home, Amanda was waiting for him, but Lucas didn't want to talk. He said he needed time, but Amanda insisted, saying they needed to face it together. Lucas looked at her and asked how they could face something together when she was the first to destroy what they had. Amanda tried to argue, but he interrupted her, saying that even if they resolved the problem within the company, that didn't mean they could resolve the issue between them. She burst into tears, but Lucas remained firm. He said he would do whatever was necessary to protect her legally, but emotionally he didn't know if he could forgive her. Amanda approached, holding his hands and asking him not to give up, but Lucas slowly released her, saying that he had already given up the moment he opened that door and saw what he saw. She stood there, standing still, while Lucas grabbed his keys and walked out the door. He needed air, needed distance to think. As she walked, she felt the weight of her wedding ring on her finger and, for the first time, considered taking it off. I knew that decision would change everything, but I also knew that I could no longer live in the shadow of Amanda's lies. The end was near, but Lucas still didn't know if he was ready to face it. Lucas sat on an empty park bench, the sun slowly setting over the horizon, turning the sky orange and red. The cool night air was beginning to envelope the city, but he barely felt the temperature. The weight of the last few days seemed to have drained all of his strength, leaving him with only the echo of the words Amanda had said. Even after all the revelations, he couldn't decide whether he felt more angry or sad. She looked at the wedding ring on her hand, turning it between her fingers, as if that simple object could answer the questions that echoed in her mind. He thought about the time they had spent together, the good times and the plans for the future that now seemed as distant as the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. Amanda was at home, alone, or at least that was what he hoped. She had begged for one last chance, for an opportunity to prove that there was still something to be saved between them. But Lucas knew it wasn't that simple. The scars of what happened were too deep to be ignored. He wondered if he could trust her again or if this was just her fear of facing the consequences alone. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't erase from his memory the image of her in another man's arms, the words that came out of his mouth to justify the unjustifiable. When he finally returned home, he found Amanda sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. She stood up as soon as he entered, but Lucas held up his hand so she wouldn't say anything. He needed to speak first, needed to get it out of him before he exploded. He said he was tired of the lies, the justifications, the empty promises. He said he wanted to move on, but that he couldn't see a path where the two of them could walk together. Amanda approached and tried to argue, saying that she was willing to do anything to win him back, but Lucas shook his head. He said he no longer wanted to live in a relationship based on regrets and insecurities. She fell to her knees, begging him to think better, but Lucas remained firm. He said he couldn't erase what he saw, that he couldn't pretend that all that hadn't happened. He said he deserved more, that he needed peace. Amanda continued crying, but Lucas turned his back and went up the stairs. When he returned, he had a suitcase packed. She asked where he was going, but Lucas just replied that he needed space. He said she could keep the house until everything was legally resolved, but that from that moment on, their paths were separate. The next day, Lucas looked for a lawyer and filed for divorce. Amanda tried to call him several times, but he didn't answer. I received long and emotional messages, but I no longer had the strength to respond to them. He spent the next few days reorganizing his life, looking for a new place to live and trying to find a reason to move on. But deep down, I knew I still needed to close that cycle. Meanwhile, Amanda's ex-lover faced the consequences of his own choices. After the evidence was turned over, he was fired and investigated. His wife kicked him out of the house and filed for divorce, taking most of the couple's assets. He tried to look for Amanda, but she refused to see him, blaming him for ruining her life. Alone and without prospects, he disappeared, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and exposed lies. Amanda, in turn, sank into a state of depression. She lost the trust of her co-workers and was removed from her position until the investigation was completed. She spent her days at home, surrounded by the silence she created. He was trying to find ways to fix what he had done, but he knew that some things just couldn't be fixed. I called Lucas every now and then, but he never answered. His messages went unanswered, and each silence felt heavier than the last. Lucas, on the other hand, began to rebuild his life little by little. He found support in friends and family, who helped him regain the confidence he had lost. He started going to new places, meeting new people and, eventually, he found someone who brought lightness to his life again. At first, she was afraid to open up, to repeat the same mistakes, but she decided to give what she felt a chance. Over time, he realized that he deserved to be happy and that he didn't need to carry the weight of the past forever. Amanda, upon learning that Lucas was moving on, tried to look for him once again. He asked to meet him, saying he needed one last talk. He accepted, but made it clear that this would be his final farewell. When they met, Amanda apologized once again and said she hoped he could forgive her one day, even if only in thought. Lucas thanked him for his words, but said that forgiveness did not mean going back. He said that he had learned to value himself and that, no matter how much he had suffered, he was ready to move forward without looking back. Amanda stood there, watching him leave once again, knowing that this was the last image she would have of him. Lucas left that meeting with the feeling that he had finally completed the cycle. He took a deep breath and moved forward, leaving the scars behind and embracing the possibility of a new beginning. This story shows how betrayal destroys lives, ruins homes and leaves marks that time cannot erase. Therefore, we want to know what you thought of this narrative. Leave your comment below and share your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. And remember, this channel does not support any type of cheating. Until the next story.